Welcome to the Boiler Room Trading Podcast with your host, Connor Polifrone. What's going on, traders? Welcome back to the Boiler Room Trading Podcast. Today we're going to be discussing the coronavirus and the events that have been taking place and unfolding, and then we're also going to be discussing the financial markets going forward in 2020. We're going to try to make this simple, fast, to the point, so we don't take up too much of your guys' time. So to start things off, let's get you caught up to speed if you're not already caught up to speed, which seems pretty hard to believe, considering the media has blown this thing out of the water so hard. So we're going to probably assume you're up to speed, but if not, here we go. So the virus starts in China, kind of breaks out there first, and then it spreads over, into many other countries, specifically Europe, and now specifically the United States. So let's take a second and think about how long it has taken China to at least get the virus somewhat under control. And the reason I say somewhat under control is because that is what China is now telling us, and that is what the news is now reporting, that China's cases have been decreasing, the exposure or the spread is slowing down. So again, it appears that they have things somewhat under control. This started pretty much in December of 2019 and is now March of 2020. So we have seen that for the epicenter of the breakout in Wuhan, or China, if you may, has taken about 4 months to get things under control. Does that mean we now have a foundation for a 4-month, kind of control measure? Does that mean that now it will take Europe about 4 months to control this? Will it now take the United States 4 months to control this? Will it take, let's say, Mexico 4 months to control it, or Africa 4 months to control it? And considering all things are equal, does it take 4 months to control it? If so, that pretty much tells us that we're going to see an economic slowdown all the way up until halfway through 2020 at a 4-month control rate, right? Because if the United States is going to take 4 months to control it, that means we're probably going to see a slowdown in business pretty much through halfway of 2020, okay? Now, let's think about the sort of measures that China took to even get this under control. If you guys have been following the news or reading up on this, they've taken some extreme measures to control the spread of this virus, all the way up until basically just cremating bodies, okay? So, not to get into conspiracy here, but for whatever it's worth, again, they were cremating bodies over in China. Whether it was to stop the spread of the virus or not, you can just kind of see the sort of severity of this event that was playing out. But they went as far as locking down people into their homes, shutting businesses down, and etc. to get this under control. If you'd seen any videos posted online, you'd seen that obviously China was pretty much a ghost town for like 2 months, even maybe 3 months. So with that being said, are other countries willing to take the same preventative measures in order to stop the spread or slow the spread of this virus? And if they're not, then we should probably expect that the control rate would be longer than 4 months in the United States and Europe. You've already seen in Italy that they're doing lockdowns and taking some sort of preventative measures that may be equal or close to or comparable to that of China. We haven't quite seen that here in the United States, but it's probably coming to a city near you soon. So if governments do take somewhat of the same preventative measures and or actions as China, then I could see maybe us getting this under control halfway through 2020. But that still doesn't take into consideration Mexico or Africa, because remember, the spread all has a timeline. Italy or Europe is a little bit ahead of schedule in terms of where the United States is at. So the sort of panic that's starting to set in over in Italy is really starting to happen here in the United States. It doesn't appear that we've had any sort of really uptick in cases super drastic in Africa or Mexico, but when that happens, what sort of drag does Africa's economy and Mexico's economy have on the global economy and the one here in the United States? So maybe the United States and Europe get everything under control halfway through fiscal year of 2020, but what about Africa? What about Mexico? Maybe they don't get things under control until, third quarter or fourth quarter of 2020. So when I put it into a perspective like that, I would believe that many could clearly see this playing out for majority of the year of 2020 simply on the timeline in which it takes the virus, or the virus has been spreading to new countries, in the timeline of which the uptick in infections and the precautions or preventative measures in which are taken to stop the spread happen. Okay, so basically beginning of the year, it's China. Now that we're almost into the second quarter of 2020, it's Europe and the United States. So by the time we get into the third quarter of 2020, is it Africa and is it, Mexico? Is it by time the fourth quarter rolls around, is it Russia then? Right? So you can kind of see how this might drag out a little bit longer than maybe what people are anticipating. And at that point, it doesn't seem very hard to wrap your head around the concept of having a pretty poor fiscal year of 2020. So we've already seen the markets drop somewhat 20%. A lot of people are thinking this is overdone. It's because of the media, mass hysteria, which all of that is true. But what a lot of investors don't actually understand, or a lot of times the reason investors aren't ahead of the curve in the markets, is because they don't actually kind of research and do due diligence themselves. They wait for the media to tell them. If you guys had followed our channel, not to say we're geniuses by any means, but we had predicted a correction in the markets before this happened, this one right here. And we discussed 3-4 weeks ago that schools would be closing down and to get ready for that sort of change in your day-to-day life. And that is starting to happen now. And that's because no one wants this thing to spread. So that's the sort of measures that are taking place. So right now in the markets, we've dropped somewhat 20%. Clearly, that is the markets pricing in what they believe is going to be a poor 2020. So if you would like to hear my thoughts in the short term, I believe that the markets will see a drastic bounce that will look as if the markets are becoming healthy again. But I think we're going to see a short-lived bounce in the market here very soon, which will lead us back to the prices of about 300 to 290 or 2,900 or 3,000 on the S&P 500. And that is where we're going to see some bearish traders or sellers piling back into the market to drive this lower. Ultimately, it appears that our market is in a bearish head and shoulders formation. Where we're currently at right now in the S&P 500 is bouncing off of a lower channel support. The next move after this would be a bounce up to our channel resistance, which just so happens to line up with the previous all-time highs of 2018, which would now be resistance, which in theory, not actually in theory, which then will create a perfect looking bearish head and shoulders formation, which I believe takes us lower into the second half of 2020. So I appreciate you guys tuning in as always. That's all we have for you here on today's podcast. As always, take care, and we will see you guys on the next one.